Welcome to the Christian Science Monitor. My name is Pam. And let's begin with our first article. History in the Making, Seattle Protest Zone Prompts Rethink on Policing by Ann Scott Tyson. In Seattle, as a police chopper circles overhead, a protester named John, wearing a black power pin, stands watch at a barricade at the entrance to Seattle's spontaneous new hub of activism, a 6-block area that demonstrators initially dubbed the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or the CHAZ. Orange barricades left behind by police, who abruptly vacated the Seattle Police Department's East Precinct building last week amid rallies against racism and police brutality, are now plastered with posters calling to defund SPD, a key demand of activists here who seek to shift half the police budget into community service. But views are mixed on the police role and future of the station. Many signs and graffiti are hostile to cops. Yet John, an unemployed theater worker who lives a block away and withheld his last name for privacy, says, "Autonomous zone is a misnomer and stresses that police can return to the station whenever they want. City officials, including Police Fire Chief Harold Scroggins and Mayor Jenny Durkan, have freely entered the zone in recent days, along with flocks of visitors. There is no reason peaceful protests can't coexist with police presence," John says of the CHAZ, which over the weekend was renamed the CHOP. What that stands for, however, depends on whom you ask, a reflection of the movement's evolving goals and leadership. An entry sign calls it the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. Some say the O now stands for organized. John and others say they sought freedom to protest but never asked police to leave. Ensconced in Capitol Hill, a nightlife and entertainment district long a center of the city's LGBTQ and counterculture communities, the protest zone has been largely peaceful since police left. Although tensions have flared with counter-demonstrators, people speak at open mics, cook, paint protest art, light candles at a memorial to those killed by police, garden, watch documentaries, and dance in the streets. The main purpose of CHOP, activists here say, is to occupy the space in order to imagine, debate, and experiment with a radically different relationship between police and the community. It's showing the world that having police breathing down your neck all the time is not necessary, says Black Lives Matter organizer Mark Henry Jr., standing in front of the boarded-up precinct building, its sign altered with gold spray paint to read, "Seattle's People's Department." This place will be a monument to social justice and a beacon of hope to the world that police reform is not only possible, it is necessary. In the limelight, Seattle's protest zone has grabbed the national and international spotlight with sharp attacks from conservative critics, including President Trump. On Sunday, Mr. Trump depicted it as a takeover of Seattle by far-left militant groups. On Monday, he repeated threats to crack down on the zone if Mayor Durkan and Washington State Governor Jay Inslee do not. Ms. Durkan, a former U.S. attorney, has called the president's description untruthful and his threats illegal. The zone is not a lawless wasteland of anarchist insurrection. It is a peaceful expression of our community's collective grief and their desire to build a better world, she tweeted. Last week, Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best told officers their departure from the precinct in Capitol Hill was not my decision, saying she was concerned about arson, but the city relented to severe public pressure. But both she and Mayor Durkan have initiated policing reforms in consultation with the community. This is a pivotal moment in history, Chief Best, the first black woman to hold SPD's top post, said Sunday in an appearance on Face the Nation. "We are going to move in a different direction and policing will never be the same," she said after participating in a Black Lives Matter march of 60,000 people in Seattle on Saturday that she said brought her an epiphany. Seattle has moved rapidly to meet some protesters' demands, temporarily banning the use of tear gas except in life-threatening situations, requiring police to display name tags and wear body cameras at protests, and withdrawing the National Guard. Experts in criminal justice reform say that too often police are called because social workers or other professionals are not available, which Mayor Durkan says must change. More broadly, the United States needs to expand investment in low-income housing and mental health and addictive services, which have been underfunded for decades, says Catherine Beckett, a professor of law, societies, and justice at the University of Washington. The U.S. now spends twice as much on social control as on social welfare, says Dr. Beckett. Well, what's next? On the leafy streets of Capitol Hill, the multiracial community of protesters range from professionals with remote day jobs to laid-off workers and homeless people. Activists have set up tents for shelter and started a community garden in Cal Anderson Park. Donated food and medical supplies, including gloves, masks, and hand sanitizer to fend off the coronavirus, are distributed from sidewalk stalls. Everyone pitches in to pick up the trash. It seems to be a good place to live. I'm not going to be bothered by the cops, says Ada, an out-of-work computer program who moved here from Dallas several weeks ago and has been living out of her car. It's history in the making. It's cool, she says, cooking a pan of beans and rice over a camping stove set up in a red wagon, but also complicated. One complication, protesters say, involves threats from white extremist groups such as Proud Boys. Several men wearing Proud Boys shirts showed up Monday. Protesters have kept police barricades in place, which they say is primarily to keep drivers from harming crowds, as happened last Sunday when a gunman drove toward a protester, shooting one in the arm who tried to stop him. They have also formed a night watch from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. I help out where I can with the watch, says Ada, who declined to give her last name. Over the weekend, occupiers grouped in circles at the CHOP main intersection discussed goals and then formed teams to handle different duties ranging from security to technology and communications. Our long-term goal is to make a community center so we have a place we feel safe to come to, says Anthony Barr, a laid-off Applebee's server and frontline protester. At the same time, protester representatives are making headways in regular talks with Seattle officials led by Fire Chief Scoggins, who they say has won their trust. This week, they reached an initial consensus on an option to ease access for residents, businesses, and emergency vehicles while preserving space for demonstrations and improving safety. Sam Zimbabwe, director of the Seattle Department of Transportation, told citizen journalist Omari Salisbury the alterations are designed so the neighborhood can get back to coexisting with the protests. This is Seattle values. We are all really trying to find space together. Ron Amundsen, a local property owner, said some businesses are afraid to open and voiced concerns about fire and safety, as did some residents who no longer sleep in the zone at night. He urged the group to decide quickly on a way forward. We can all work together here and turn this into something good, he said. Police Chief Best has said that while response times are increased, officers would respond to important emergency calls in the zone. Some businesses are thriving as people crowd the area. Honestly, I do feel safer since the police left, said Cole Travis, host of Momiji, a Japanese restaurant across the street from the abandoned precinct building. It's definitely a less hostile environment. Surveying the scene from the No Cop Co-op on East Pine Street, where Black Lives Matters is written in huge, colorful letters, Brian, a healthcare worker who asked not to give his last name, is moved by the crowd and sidewalks spray painted with black and white fists side by side. You have people of all races coming in here and helping, he says as he hands out donated Clif Bars. Some people don't have much money. Maybe they only have 2 water bottles. They just want to give something, anything to the cause. It's a beautiful thing. Back on the barricade, John recalls his feeling the night the police left after more than a week of tension. They hopped on their bikes and rode up the street and disappeared, he says. I never thought the police would do that. The next night, we finally had the square and set up the PA, and lots of people who had had their voices silenced for generations had a chance to get up in front of the crowd. It was the people's mic, he says. It was a remarkable turn of events. That felt like a victory to me. This next article is titled, Why a Muslim Woman Safeguards Jewish History for All Moroccans in Casablanca, Morocco. Zor Rahihil walks past a green cloth-wrapped ancient Torah, ornamental brass lamps, and prayer books she has watched over for more than 2 decades. Such artifacts are at home in museums or synagogues in Israel, America, or Europe. Many people are surprised to find them here in Morocco. This is not just Jewish history, says Mrs. Rahihil. She traces her finger against a glass-encased century-old Judo-Moroccan script, the Hebrew engraved onto a silver plaque with North African geometric designs. This is all our history. It is unusual to have a Jewish museum in the Arab world, but perhaps even more unusual for visitors. Its curator and co-founder is a Muslim woman. Yet, Ms. Rahihil declares this is not surprising. This is natural. Here in Morocco, which has seen its Jewish population dwindle almost to the point of being forgotten, Ms. Rahihil has been at the vanguard of safeguarding the community's history and its place in society, tirelessly teaching Moroccans about a shared past she believes will pave the way for a better future. Bursting with energy and information, Ms. Rahihil, a leading expert on Arab Jewish culture in the region, is at times the main attraction. Her high-octane persona is legendary among diplomats in Morocco and researchers worldwide, from America to Israel and across the Arab world, who know her on a first-name basis. You simply cannot fully know the Moroccan Jewish community or why Morocco is such an exception in the region without Zor, said one Western diplomat. Zor is a pioneer, says Habib Kazdaghili, dean at the University of Tunis, Monoba, and an expert in Tunisia's Jewish minority. There's only a few researchers documenting Arab Jewish traditions and heritage, and she is preserving this for the entire world. Moroccan heritage. Today, at the Museum of Moroccan Judaism, the Moroccan clearly stand out. As carefully designed by Ms. Rahihil, the displays at this disused orphanage from the 1950s not only showcase North African Jews' heritage, but highlight the fact that they share the same heritage as other Moroccans. Gliding through the sun-drenched room, Ms. Rahihil enthusiastically points out wooden prayer beads that could be at home in a synagogue or a mosque, engraved silver pendants worn by Moroccan women for centuries, and thick gold thread embroidered green kaftan dresses that are a staple for weddings across Morocco. Surrounded by items that could be found in their parents' or grandparents' home, many Muslim Moroccans ask, have we been wearing Jewish jewelry and clothes all this time? I tell them dresses and jewelry have no religion. They are inanimate objects, Ms. Rahihil says, but they do have a culture, and that culture is Moroccan. The display's goal is to stir memories. Within minutes of touring the museum or speaking with Ms. Rahihil, many Moroccans recall, my grandfather's neighbor was Jewish. My father had a Jewish friend. Or my mom learned to embroider from her Jewish neighbor. Our fathers or grandfathers knew the Moroccan Jewish community very well because they studied in the same schools. They lived together in the same apartment buildings. They visited each other on holidays. They bought from each other and traded, Ms. Rahihil says. Today, everywhere you go, there are physical memories from the Jewish community. We Moroccans have a living Jewish memory. It just needs to be reawakened. Knowledge gap. Ms. Rahihil's unlikely career was launched by her own search for a society whose physical memories surrounded her growing up in Casablanca, synagogues, schools, and Jewish quarters. She, like most Moroccans born in the 1970s onward, knew little of the 1,000-year-old mixed faith society in which Moroccan Muslims and Jews lived and worked. Although Morocco did not witness the intercommunal strife or expulsion of Jewish communities that occurred in other Arab states following the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the draw of better economic opportunities in Europe and Israel sparked a steady exodus of Morocco's Jews in the 1950s and 60s. Morocco's Jewish community dwindled from 450,000 to a few thousand. As of the 1980s, entire generations of Moroccans were growing up knowing little about their fellow Jewish citizens. The only thing these generations know of Jews in general is the Arab-Israeli conflict, the occupation of Palestine, war and killing, she says. Her voice suddenly becomes urgent. These new generations are why we are here, why I am here. When Miss Rahil decided to study Jewish heritage and sites as a student at the National Institute of Heritage and Archaeology in Rabat in 1993, she became among the first Muslims researching Moroccan Judaism in the country. In the field of anthropology, you want to learn about others, she says from behind her desk at her office, and by learning about others, you learn about yourself and your society. Miss Rahil faced an uphill climb reaching out to a minority community that had become more withdrawn and more guarded as its numbers dwindled. Doors were closed, phone calls unanswered, and synagogues remained shuttered. The Moroccan Jews she approached were skeptical. Why would a Moroccan Muslim be interested in studying their community? Why would she even care? The reaction from friends and family was similar. Why are you interested in this research? She says they ask. This isn't your community. A professor's suggestion would save her research and change her career. Contact Simon Levy, a professor of Spanish language at nearby Mohammed V. University, a Jewish Moroccan intellectual who co-founded the Moroccan Communist Party. Professor Levy was a leading figure in Morocco's independence movement who was jailed by French colonial authorities and was widely respected by Moroccans. Professor Levy took Miss Rahil under his wings, helping her complete research on the Jewish world, on the Jewish saints of Casablanca. In 1996, Mr. Levy had a proposal for her: design and run the first Jewish Muslim museum in the Arab world. It was an offer I couldn't refuse, she said. Heart of the community. Once an outsider, Miss Rahil now radiates energy and projects as a beating heart at the center of the Moroccan Jewish community. One of her most impactful initiatives is hosting an annual Mimouna, the traditional Moroccan Jewish holiday held at the end of Passover, inviting diplomats and Moroccans of all faiths to observe the uniquely Moroccan celebration, helping it become mainstream in the kingdom. Miss Rahil now hosts a weekly radio show featuring Moroccan Jewish artists, musicians, and students discussing their lives and traditions growing up in Moroccan towns and villages, all in the colloquial Moroccan dialect Darija. Working under the foundation of Jewish Moroccan cultural heritage set up by Mr. Levy and community leader Sergei Berdungo, Miss Rahil has helped research and identify tens of Jewish cemeteries and synagogues across the country, paving the way for a preservation and renovation project that got royal backing from King Mohammed VI in 2018. On a typical tour, Miss Rahil likes to keep visitors guessing about her personal background, impishly slipping in asides to throw off people's assumptions about her faith, such as reading perfect Hebrew from a Torah scroll, and immediately uttering an Arabic saying predominantly used by Muslims. She constantly uses we and us when discussing Moroccans of either faith. As the tour winds to its conclusion, she playfully asks visitors to guess her background. When prompted to answer, the vast majority of guests, be they Moroccan, American, Israeli, or Saudi, conclude that she must be Jewish. I tell them that I am a Moroccan first, a woman second, And third, I come from the Muslim community, Miss Raheel says. They are always surprised, she shakes her head, and I am surprised by their surprise. But change is happening. Each year, Miss Raheel receives 40 to 50 Moroccan university students and researchers pursuing Moroccan Jewish studies, the vast majority of whom are Muslim. The museum itself has become a leading tourist destination in Casablanca, allowing her to engage with visitors from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, who are astonished that a Jewish museum could even exist on Arab soil. Always visitors to the museum are walking away saying, "Oh, they are just like us." Miss Raheel claps her hands and waves them in the air. "Yes, that is the goal. They are Moroccan like you and me," she shouts. "That is how it has always been, and that is our way forward." Our next article is titled, "Can Richmond Imagine a Future Without Robert E. Lee?" by Noah Robertson. In Richmond, Virginia, James J.J. Miner works in Shockoe Bottom, an upscale restaurant district in Richmond, Virginia, and once a center of America's slave trade. Driving across town from his office at Main Street Station, he could pass a former slave jail, Confederate Iron Works, the White House of the Confederacy, and Titanic statues of Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, J.E.B. Stuart, and Jefferson Davis marching in a line down Monument Avenue. It's a simple 7-mile loop. He could drive it in less than a lunch break. As a Richmond native, Mr. Miner knows his Virginia history. As president of Richmond's branch of the NAACP, he also knows how painful that history can be. So watching the city's leaders commit to removing symbols that memorialize racism, in his opinion, is a sign of long overdue progress. "It's a new beginning," he says. "I think it's a long time coming, as the old folks used to say. Removing those Confederate monuments, it means a lot." On June 4th, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam announced plans to remove the statue of Lee that has towered over Richmond for 130 years. Soon after, the city government committed to removing the other 4 Confederate statues from Monument Avenue. Elsewhere in the South and around the world, there has been a wave of renewed scrutiny over symbols that may say preserve a legacy of racism. From Birmingham, Alabama to Bristol, England, people have removed or announced plans to remove statues of former Confederate generals and slaveholders. Meanwhile, American institutions from NASCAR to the Navy have banned displays of the Confederate battle flag. Last week, the Senate Armed Services Committee voted to amend the annual National Defense Authorization Act to create a commission tasked with renaming military installations named after Confederate figures. The full Senate still needs to vote on the bill, which President Donald Trump has said he will veto. For some experts familiar with past campaigns to remove such monuments, the past few weeks mark a turning point. Just 3 years ago, white nationalists marched en masse when the city of Charlottesville attempted to take down a statue of Lee. Though Governor Northam's orders is being challenged in court, resistance today has abated. Leisha Brooks, Chief Workplace Transformation Officer at the Southern Poverty Law Center, or the SPLC, attributes that shift to a major change in public opinion, similar to that seen with Black Lives Matter. In each successive moment, people have been saying the same thing, that this is a representative of anti-black racism or white supremacy or systemic racism. But people seem to get it now, she says. Those kinds of huge societal shifts say a lot and really do a lot to begin to dismantle these racist structures that we've lived with and we just go along with because they've just always been. These were not the winners. The SPLC first began to study Confederate monuments following the mass shooting at the Mother Emanuel AME Church by a white supremacist in Charleston, South Carolina 5 years ago today. Since then, says Ms. Brooks, they have documented more than 1,800 active monuments to the Confederacy, such as school names, statues, and memorials. According to lore, she says, these monuments rose up soon after the Civil War to commemorate those who fought for the lost cause of the Confederacy. The reality, says Benjamin Forrest, a professor at McGill University in Quebec, is that most were constructed in two waves, from 1890 to 1910 and from 1950 to 1970. The first period, he said, came along with Jim Crow in the South, and the second was a response to the civil rights era. In both, says Professor Forrest, Southerners used Confederate monuments to rewrite the history of the Civil War and assert power over African Americans. The cliché is that history is written by the winners, and these were not the winners, says Gabriel Reich, a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. The Confederates lost the war and lost the dream of an independent slave republic, but they won the peace. Winning the peace, says Professor Reich, means maintaining racial subjugation after the war ended and successfully reframing the Civil War around states' rights and honor. Confederate monuments, he says, were crucial to both aims, embodying a mythic Confederate heritage into the future. In turn, those displays marginalize the heritage of most African Americans, for whom the antebellum South is synonymous with slavery and oppression, says Ms. Brooks. If anything, she says, they're a sign of how little things have changed. The continued existence of the monuments continue the political statement that the people who insist these remain up still call the shots, says Professor Reich. Well, this time it may be different. When Richmond's Lee statue went up in 1890, around 150,000 people flocked to watch the ceremony, says Professor Reich. Former Confederate soldiers addressed the crowd. The now famous Confederate battle flag was everywhere. Now the statues on Monument Avenue have become a rallying point for the recent protests in Richmond. Mr. Miner, president of Richmond's branch of the NAACP, has joined thousands of others who gather around the statue of Lee to decry police brutality and systemic racism. It was like an ecumenical moment, a spiritual moment, he says of a protest he attended on Monument Avenue. Folks were walking hand in hand, talking, shaking, hugging, loving, laughing, both black and white, rich and poor, and the in-between, all coming together to say, enough is enough. The change in public opinion surrounding the monument, says Ms. Brooks, comes in part from the momentum of past movements. It's also, she says, a product of increased public awareness of white supremacy, spurred in large part by the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. People are beginning to understand, or begin to more fully understand, what it means when we say a white supremacist culture or anti-black racism, she says. So understanding or embracing those concepts more deeply has allowed them to make the connection between these symbols of the Confederacy and some of the ways that society upholds systemic racism. People seem to get it now, she says. Notwithstanding, not everyone in America is ready to pull down the statues, as shown by court challenges and threats of presidential veto. An early June poll from Morning Consult found more support for keeping the monuments up than taking them down, though that number has eroded since Charlottesville. Some 44% of Americans support keeping them in place, which is down from 52% in 2017. How important are the symbols? Such pushback doesn't surprise Mr. Miner. After so many years, he adjusted to the challenges that often accompany being black in the South. He says, one time, he says, a police officer pulled a gun on him on the side of the road. Another time, he was strip searched near public housing. He didn't know why either time. It's tough being a black man in America, says Mr. Miner. Even if all the Confederate monuments in Richmond and beyond are taken down, he says, more work will remain. After all, they're only symbols. But symbols can matter, says Professor Forrest. Monuments, in his opinion, reflect the society in which they're made. It says something to keep them up. It says something to take them down. It will mean something to Mr. Miner if these statues are moved. He doesn't think America has a balance of history, and he thinks the country needs it. Righting what many see as a historical wrong is a sign that things have changed, he says. Richmond is now getting it, he said. We're moving in the right direction. Plain and simple. What was will never exist again. Next article, Out of Quarantine and Into My Heart by Sue Wonder. I knew from the get-go that my foster dog Blue, a highly active animal in need of a home during this pandemic when local shelters are short-staffed and struggling, would win me over. But for weeks I kept my adoption options open. When it became clear that my summer travel plans would tank and my son promised to care for him when I go abroad again, I caved. And now we're in this together. The dog has taken shameless advantage of his change of fortune. He's commandeered the couch, the window side easy chair, and the far greater comforts in both bedrooms of my Midwestern bungalow home. He sailed through the front screen door and jumped the backyard fence to get to know the local streets and a nearby 40-acre park, wholly on his own. All exit possibilities have now since been reinforced. He scatters my recycling bags, devours any food left out on our countertop, preferring English muffins to bagels, and once managed to drink a glass of milk I had put on the table for my visiting grandson while I went to the basement. When I came up, there it was, an upright empty glass. Connor was still in a deep teenage sleep. Blue was now lying on the sofa, licking off a telltale white mustache, glancing at me appreciatively with his one brown and one vividly blue eye. Still disbelieving, I actually looked for videos of dogs drinking from glasses on YouTube and, sure enough, came upon photographer William Wegman's famous Weimaraner, Man Ray, doing just that on Late Night with David Letterman some years ago. Blue dragged me behind him and from side to side on walks in pursuit of one thing or another. Obedience training is not in the cards these days, and he takes every opportunity to bolt towards any life form we encounter. Even certain flora are bolt-worthy. He once ushered me through a patch of poison ivy. Well, what's not to love? He became a neighborhood celebrity, like the big brown dog I recently bid goodbye to at an advanced age. Omaha stood out with his beautiful brown rippling fur, ruffled feet, and feathered tail, sparking compliments up until the last week of his life, but he had once been abused and didn't like to get close to many people. Blue's main asset is the sheer force of his exuberant personality, and he's far more trusting of folks than my Omi ever was. He adores meeting anyone. He constantly challenges the 6 feet of separation rule as his leash is not quite that long. I'm making some progress on training him myself to walk less erratically on a lead. Here, Connor has been a great help, strong enough to hold him to heel when a squirrel catches his eye, and patient enough to kneel and encourage him to stay with treats. But most of the time Blue and I are out there just a twosome, and we're still a walking work in progress, not to mention a huge source of entertainment for a suddenly more connected community of neighbors who meet and greet outside. Released from his shelter kennel, Blue has stretched into a new world of mobility and freedom in a place where everybody already knows his name, if not the correct French spelling of his adoption certificate. The sweet irony of that these days isn't lost on anyone who sees him coming, walking me. Well, that concludes today's reading of the Christian Science Monitor. This is PM saying be blessed and make it a great day.